Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast that cuts through the noise of the many policies and regulations that affect American agriculture. Each week, we pull back the curtain on the programs, policies, and perceptions shaping the agricultural community in rural America. If you've ever felt like something doesn't add up, you're not alone. I'm Jenny, and this is Smoke and Mirrors. Let's make sense of the maze we call farm policy.
Welcome to Smoke and Mirrors, the podcast where we make sense of agricultural policy. Today, I'm excited to have Mark Schleusener with me, who is a retired federal employee. He worked with the National Agricultural Statistics Service, NASS. But could you tell us, first of all, what is NASS?
Good morning, Jenny. NASS is a federal statistical agency that measures agricultural production, prices of commodities, chemical use, food in storage. We were the bean counters for agriculture. There's other federal groups that do that, and some of the more well-known reports are the monthly unemployment rate, right? The jobs report. There's a group of statistical people that do that. Similar with the rate of inflation of the consumer price index. Those reports make the news in general. The reports that NASS does are focused on agriculture, and so a lot of people, they're not part of their normal thinking process. But for farmers, ranchers, ag businesses, they're very important.
Absolutely, and that data, I think, is essential for a lot of business decisions as well as policy. So you said NASS is a federal statistical agency. Could you tell us what that means exactly?
In general, it means we are allowed to ask people for information. There's certain rules we must follow, and I keep on saying we like I'm still employed. I did that for more than 40 years. I was a lifer with NASS. It was a matchup that worked well. But federal agencies are allowed to ask people for information. The data they collect are protected by laws so that someone else cannot get them. I mean, one of the fears is, if I tell you about my business, what if the IRS uses that against me? Well, the IRS can't get that data because it's protected by the set of federal rules that cover this type of data collection. Legal process like subpoena does not get the information collected by federal statistical agencies. It is protected.
And I also used to work for a federal statistical agency, the Economic Research Service, and I can say we were very careful about the data sets that we have. I was threatened, well, not really threatened, but kind of threatened several times. If you mess this up, there could be jail time and a large fine. We took
absolutely.
That very seriously.
Every year I signed a piece of paper, and so did all the NASS employees. It says, I know the rules, and here are the penalties for breaking the rules, and I understand them. So telling people and individuals, sharing someone's individual data with someone else is wrong. Talking about the totals or averages that have not been published yet is very, very wrong. And
Absolutely.
There's jail time, there's $250,000 fine, and good luck getting another federal job after you get nailed with that. You're done.
I mean, everything that we did depended on the data. I mean, almost everything.
Right. There's a trust that gets developed between the producers and the government agencies. Sometimes the trust is frayed and it's difficult to get the information, but the information has not been leaked or sold or shared. No, that just doesn't happen.
Absolutely. All right. I guess before we get too much into the weeds on this, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Sure. Like I say, it's 40 years with one organization. I moved around a number of times. That's how you get promoted. I had mostly worked in state offices, and here's trivia for you. Out of our 50 states, there are 4 states whose capitals are named after presidents. And I have worked in all 4 of those, plus one additional state. And I would kind of do 3 years and move, 3 years and move. That was the thing to do in the 80s. Then I got to D.C. Mostly I was a data analyst. Eventually I went up the ladder. Somebody became a supervisor of data analysts. So Jenny, can you tell me a state whose capital is named after a president? Because I worked there, if you can think of one.
Illinois is Springfield, so that's...
And that's where I finished my career.
Yeah,
the last 10 years of my career, I was doing communication outreach. It was a very different thing, but I really enjoyed it. Mostly being a data analyst and such. I was a number
Jefferson
of
City.
Bingo.
Sorry.
Missouri has a capital named after Thomas Jefferson, and I worked there in St. Louis.
I was thinking Columbia. That's bad. That's a no-no, right?
Columbia is not the capital.
Trouble for that, probably. That is a lot of time with one organization, I think, for anybody. I imagine things changed an awful lot during your career, how data was collected, what data was collected on, the methods.
That is absolutely true, but I was a square peg in a square hole. If you go back before my time, let's say the 60s and 70s, almost all data collection was by mail and by personal interview. Someone would drive to the farm, knock on the door, can I talk to you? That's expensive. The mail is cheap, but it's slow. Personal interviews are expensive, but they're good. You get the best data quality.
Right.
More and more telephone data collections started happening, let's say in the 70s and into the 80s. And in the 80s, then there was something called computer-assisted telephone interviewing, or CATI. It's excellent. So the computer is programmed to show the question, and I, the interviewer, will read that question, and I'm on the phone with a farmer or a rancher, and then the farmer or rancher tells me something. I enter it into the computer. That same program knows to route differently. Did you plant any wheat? No. Skip the rest of the wheat questions. Move on to another crop. Also, if there are, let's say, unusual data, very high, very low values, the computer program is programmed to find that, and then maybe there's some probing questions. Your corn yield was 64 bushels per acre. Was there a problem in production? Yeah, there was a terrible hailstorm. Things like that can clean up the data set during data collection when you're talking with the most knowledgeable person, the producer.
Right, right. And now I suppose a lot of data is collected by the internet?
Yes, more and more. During the Clinton-Gore administration, what was that called? The sort of the paperwork reduction thing, or almost all surveys had to be available on the internet. And I think nearly all are available on the internet for the NASS projects. So typical process, mail out a letter that says we're doing the November crop production survey. You can go to this link and report, or we will start calling on this date. Frequently there's a paper questionnaire involved too, so you could mail back the paper questionnaire. That's mail mode. You could respond on the internet by clicking on a couple links. That's internet mode. There's also telephone mode, and there might be personal interview mode. Almost all of the telephone interviews have the CATI, the computer-assisted aspect, and not all, but a large portion of the personal interviews, the face-to-face interviews, have something similar.
Don't the enumerators use iPads now, or some sort of tablet device? Yeah,
that was what NASS decided to do, was issue tablets rather than laptops. Mm-hmm. I worked in the research division when we were trying to get some of this done in the field. The face-to-face interviewing with the laptop is a little bit difficult. You may be doing it on the hood of a pickup truck as opposed to sitting down at a kitchen table. You might be standing in the barn. And so you've got to have something you can hold on to, and you'd like to maintain eye contact with the person interviewing, but still look at the computer screen and enter the data. So that's a struggle, a learning curve there.
Yeah, absolutely. So the data, the way that data, actually I'm curious, how much of it is, data gets reported by internet now?
Sure. In general, with farmers and ranchers, not a large percentage, let's say 5 to 10% of reports. With the ag businesses, it's much higher. And let's face it, at the ag businesses, let's say grain elevators, where we're getting grains in storage or price information, it's usually going to someone who sits at a computer and does their job. That's what they do. Okay. And for farmers and ranchers, that's something they might need to do, but it's not the major portion of their job. They're feeding cattle, they're planting crops, they're doing things like that.
Right. Absolutely. So, sounds like, data collection methods evolved. How did the data that was collected evolve? Has NASS had to focus on what data is collected over time? I know there's probably certain rules for what data has to be collected as well.
Yes, some of it is legislated. There needs to be a monthly crop production report, and that's been going on for decades or maybe more than a century. The crops and states will change. So if there was to be a November crop production report, in Illinois, the questions would be asked about corn and soybeans, because Illinois grows a lot of corn and soybeans. If it was Texas, there'd be questions on cotton. If it's another state, I don't know, Delaware, maybe they're not big enough to be part of that project. So those things change. Another big change was in the 90s, there was kind of a chemical scare. Alar on apples became a public news thing, and people in show business were talking about it and saying, we're poisoning our children and things like that. So NASS began to measure chemical use, because there was not really a data set to determine how much were farmers using, how many acres were treated, what amount of pesticide was used. There was no data set. And yet the EPA is making rules for how to apply these chemicals. Be nice to have a data set to look at and see what's going on, as well as the physical, medical, chemical, biological issues. There's also, what's actually being done. And NASS began to measure that during the 90s.
I remember at one point, I think this might have been when I was still at USDA, that there was a survey on pecans or pecans, I guess, depending where you're from. But there were budget issues, so something had to be cut, and that got cut, and then I think some legislator came back and asked for it or put it in a bill that you had to start collecting that data again. Does this happen sometimes? Yeah.
Yes. Depending on who you ask, there's either a a large need for more and more information on more commodities in more states. The people who are data users want more and more information. That does cost more and more money. There are a few projects that are paid for by the industry. The floriculture has provided funding to expand the scope of that project. So I think it touches all 50 states now. And it used to be, let's say, the 15 or 20 biggest states. The floriculture is a big industry. If you go to any, Lowe's or Walmart or whatever, you can buy a rose bush or a maple tree or something like that. Someone is growing those things. The Lowe's and the Walmarts, they sell them, but they don't grow them. Let's talk to the growers. How are they doing it? How much are they selling? What's the wholesale price? What's the retail price?
Right. And isn't there some of the dairy statistics that the milk producers are contributing to?
I'm not sure about funding on that.
I forget. Okay.
I don't think that's right. There's at least something that is legislated where people are required to respond. That's in, I think, the sort of the butter in storage, the dairy products in storage. I think that is one of the few things that are required by law. Almost all the reports that NASS does are based on voluntary data collection. The 5-year census, every 5-year census of agriculture is different. That one is mandatory. And that milk products thing is, I believe, mandatory. And that's for the people that store it rather than the people that milk the cows.
Okay, gotcha. All right. I wasn't sure about that. I mean, but the amount of data that's collected decreased or become more focused over time?
If anything, I'd say it's increased, but it probably depends on exactly what time period. Not too long ago, there was a thing where NASS dropped some county estimates because there was a funding shortage, like a shutdown, kind of like this.
Right.
And there were issues with how much money is available. So NASS decided to not do this report. And there was kind of an outcry because a lot of people want that information, need that information. There are valid uses for that information. And so then I believe it was legislated to return. There will be county estimates from NASS.
Right. That happened recently with beef cattle, I think, cattle inventories.
The July cattle report was scrapped for a while due to funding issues, but, the outcry. And then senators and representatives can write legislation that requires NASS or any other federal agency to do things. And that's one of the things they required. Sometimes it's more than just talking. Sometimes it's legislation. Did
that affect your day-to-day work very much? That kind of sort of how the agency navigated budget issues versus what Congress is asking for?
Yes, it became a big deal. Where I was doing in the spokesperson job at the time. They called it state statistician, but my job was to communicate with individual farmers and ranchers, but also the agricultural organizations. So let's say the Illinois Farm Bureau, the Illinois Corn Growers, other USDA agencies like the Farm Service Agency. So I needed to keep them informed as to what was happening and respond to their questions or anger about why isn't this report going to be ready? I need it. It's important because, and they had good reasons sometimes. I was not in charge of that policy. I was kind of stuck in the middle on that one.
Yeah, I understand. And I've worked in a couple different states now, in New York, here in Kansas, and in both cases, a state statistician was pretty involved, different producer meetings, different groups of stakeholders would come together and would be there and be sharing information and kind of playing this intermediary role. It's a big job and there's not many staff at the state level, right?
That's correct. And NASS moved to a regional structure in, I think, 2013 or 14. So there used to be an office in every state or nearly every state. There was one for all of New England. But then, and there might be 10 to 15, 20, depending on the size of the state. So a big agricultural state, Iowa, Kansas, Illinois, they would have 10 to 15 federal employees, maybe even more. Then the regionalization happened, and there became 12 regional centers, and each regional center would gather and process data for a set of states. In those states, there might be 2 people left behind. Someone like me, a spokesperson, and someone who is coordinating the enumerators, that is, the interviewers. Need to be a process for keeping them in touch, making sure they're trained, keeping them aware of the schedules and things like that.
Right. So how many, let's talk a little bit more about the enumerators. My impression is that they're mostly women and they're from the areas where they're working, but that might be wrong.
That's generally true, but not universally true. There's a lot of men and women. It tends to be older people. Tends to be people with a farm background. A lot of them were farming or ranching, and they want to have kind of a retirement job, and it keeps them in touch with the industry that they love. We're fortunate to have these people. They are contract employees rather than federal employees. The job has minimal benefits, things like Social Security, but there's no health insurance associated with it. We've had to bump up the salary some, in particular in some areas where there might be an office with 20 or 200 people making phone calls, a phone center in St. Louis. St. Louis has a higher cost of living than rural areas. How are you going to pay the people an appropriate wage? How are you going to be able to attract people? Wages are an issue. You got to pay to get good people.
Anywhere.
And we're fortunate to have them. We're fortunate to have them working for us.
Right.
By the way, they are subject to the same rules as the federal employees about sharing information.
So, how many enumerators? Because not every survey has a personal interview. But say for a state like Illinois or Kansas or one of the bigger states, how many enumerators would they have?
Back in the day before regionalization, I want to say it was 75-ish, maybe even 100 in Illinois. They're all part-time employees, and maybe 30 or 40 of them would be working almost every month for a week or two every month, and a lot of them would be working on 1 or 2 projects a year.
Okay.
Because of expenses, phone centers became the bigger deal. Try to get more data on the phone because it's cheaper and it's faster. And if you on the personal interview, you do get better quality data, but you need to pay someone time and mileage to drive to where the person is. Hope the person is there. Sometimes they're not. You got to pay them to drive back. Got to pay time and mileage.
And do you know, is NASS working on evolving from phone calls still? Because I know my parents farm in Illinois, and they got rid of their landline. I don't know if they give out their cell phone number or not, but is that something that's being addressed, or do you think it's still going to be effective for a while?
It's an ongoing issue, and the advent of cell phones and the dropping of landlines has become an issue with any kind of polling or survey work. The people that design and maintain the database that is used for sampling, it contains sort of name, address, phone number information. There's ways to put several phone numbers in there, including landlines, mobile lines. They're notated as such. Also on that sampling database, there's information like the size of the farm in acres, the crops they grow, or the livestock they have, so that when sampling happens, you can draw an effective sample, making sure to sample some small farms, some medium-sized farms, and some large farms. That's called stratification for the statistical buzzword.
Right. That is important. I understand.
It's just much more efficient. There's lots and lots of small farms in Illinois. They may add up, depending on the commodity, they may all add up to 10 or 15% of the state production. So you'd like to spend about 10 or 15% of your dollars on that. But they're much more than 10 or 15% of the population of farms. They might be 50% of the population of farms, but 15% of the production. So let's focus some of the effort on the largest farms, some on the medium-sized farms, some on the small farms.
I have heard many times that smaller farms are better about responding to surveys. Is that still the case?
I'm not sure. I know when I took on the communication outreach role, I sort of inherited 3 very large farms. And I would contact them 4 times a year, and I had excellent response rates, close to perfect. Now, that was 3 individual farms who were really cooperative. Not all of them are cooperative. Some will just not say anything. That is true. Small farms, they probably don't get surveyed as often, and that can be a benefit. The large farms are going to be contacted more frequently, and that can become a respondent burden thing that works against collecting the data.
Yeah, I know. It seems like there's a lot of marketing and research companies that are also contacting farmers. So.
Lots of the fertilizer companies want to know about what the crop farmer is doing. This is true.
Is there anything else about enumerators that you wanted to touch on?
Thank you very much to the many that I have met, to those that I have trained, and to those that are still working for NASS. Thank you. Yeah. They're not getting a paycheck either. They're shut down like everybody else.
Right. So, I think, some of the different NASS reports, people are highly anticipating. The timing is very important. But I'm curious, what was your perspective on what reports were the most in demand? Which ones did you feel the most pressure about?
Sure. It changed based on where I was. So I was in Wisconsin, and the capital is Madison, Madison.
Yes.
Dairy was the big thing, and that got a lot of attention. On a national level, it's probably the crop production reports that are done every month and the quarterly reports with acreage and stocks. Those reports can move the markets for commodity prices. They get a lot of scrutiny, a lot of chatter and double second guessing and Monday morning quarterbacking, and all that happens. So those are the ones that cause the biggest communications issues. They get a lot of traffic on Twitter. If you're in sort of the ag Twitter world, they get a lot of postings as soon as the report is published. Gesundheit.
Thank you. All right. Did you ever, I guess, could you give us some examples of, particular releases that got a lot of attention that you were working on or something like that?
2012 might be a good year to talk about. That was the drought across many Midwestern states, and it was a kind of a generational drought. Could be compared back to the Dust Bowl in the 30s, that bad. So lots and lots of focus on, will there be a crop? Where is there a crop? And that's where, at the time, there were some, I guess I'll say, district estimates within the state of Illinois. There are 9 agricultural areas of about 10 counties apiece, or 11 counties in Illinois, and there were some forecasting done at that level. That is no longer. But people wanted to know, where is there going to be a crop? And it was so bad in the southern part of Illinois, where the soil is not as good as the central. Central Illinois is highly productive soil. Southern Illinois, not so much. At the end of the season, after all the work was done, and I need to add this in, there was a significant rainstorm that came in after 1st of September. It really helped soybeans. It was too late to help corn. And there were counties in the southern part of Illinois where the average corn yield was lower than the average soybean yield. Hard to imagine that, because a typical corn yield down there is like 100 to 100, and in a real good year is above that, and soybeans are 30, 40, 50 bushels, but it was completely flipped. The corn was devastated by the timing of the drought, and the last remnants of some hurricane, I think, got to the soybean plants in time to make a decent little crop. Not a good crop, but something to harvest, And
prices were up.
Prices were huge. There was significant insurance payments and farm program payments, and there's an agricultural safety net done by other parts of USDA that help make sure things like this don't put a whole bunch of farms out of business. We need the farms, need the ranches.
Absolutely. Well, in Kansas, we have very volatile weather, so
you got that irrigation going for you out there. Not so much of that in Illinois.
In some parts of the state, but
Western Kansas.
That stuff too. It's becoming more expensive to pump. The well depth is increasing, so
right. I also worked in Nebraska, and the state capital is
Lincoln.
There you go. And that's where I started learning about irrigation and center pivots. The western part of Nebraska has lots and lots of those center pivots.
Yeah. Do you have any? I guess I don't even know if you can share it or not, but any, I don't say positive or negative stories where somebody gave you a hard time about something, or problems you had with visiting a farm, or it could be positive stories as well.
Let me try this. When I first took on the communication and outreach role, I knew I was going to be traveling around the state, and I told my wife I was going to be like a struggling rock band, and I was going to go anywhere to talk to anyone at any time. And I kind of did that for a year. And I remember one of the early ones, I went to a certain county farm bureau meeting, and I was going to talk about what NASS does and why it's important to respond. But the people there were really upset about a report that NASS had published recently, and so I heard a lot about that. It was not a pleasant meeting for me, but that was my job, was to go there and listen to that and try to have good responses for that. And then I drove back home in the dark, in the winter, on small rural roads. So that was a tough day. I mean, not a fun job to do, but an important job to do. And then, the conditions. So after about a year, I became more selective about where to go and when to go, trying to just be a little bit safer and things like that. But also I think it was important to just introduce myself to as many people as possible. If you have a question about NASS, here's my business card. I started exchanging business cards at all the conferences I went to. I ended up getting I had 1,000 names in my iPhone contact list, because almost every time I went to a conference, I'd get 3 or 4, and I would send them an email. It was nice to meet you. If you have any questions, here's my contact. Did that all the time.
Yeah. And is that pretty common for most NASS state directors now, that they have a very large role as public facing?
It's changing some. Mostly you'd like to have someone who's trained in media and things like that, where I was trained in numbers. I've kind of got the gift of gab, so it worked out well for me.
Yep.
But I did get training on how to be a good interview, how to prepare for an interview. There are some things you probably shouldn't say. The training we had was, a lot of it at the beginning was focused on, don't let the reporter trick you into saying the wrong thing. Honestly, I don't think I ever had, or maybe one time had, a reporter I thought was trying to trick me. Most of that was just not the case. Especially with what I would call small town newspapers or radio, AM radio covers a lot of agriculture.
Oh, yeah.
We would make little 2-minute sound files and put them on our website, and then the small radio stations could gather them and play them on their shows and talk about the crop conditions or the livestock reports and things like that. If I ever got calls from Chicago, it was either because something was big in the news, it was a drought or a flood or a crisis of some kind. Then I guess I kind of, honestly, my guard went up a little bit. These were people who were not familiar with agriculture sometimes. Other times, more interesting. Someone is calling me from a small town newspaper, which are, let's face it, those are dying too, and that's sad that they are going away. They might be weekly now instead of daily. And someone would call me, and they were assigned to interview me about the cattle report, but they mostly did high school sports. So they didn't sometimes know exactly what questions to ask, and I would try to help them. This was me trying to help them. If they were upfront with me and say, hey, I'm new to this, because I normally cover this thing, but now they need me to cover this, help me out, I would certainly help them. That's my job.
Yeah. I interact with reporters probably not as much as you would have at time to time, questions about the farm economy, different policy issues, and a lot of it's just they're trying to learn, and they might take little nuggets of what you say, but part of the job is just helping them get up to speed fairly quickly on something that might not be their primary area or might be more specialized than what they do.
I think that's exactly right. And agriculture is a vast, diverse, complicated business area. So it's hard for someone who doesn't spend a lot of time on it to be knowledgeable. Occasionally, I remember doing an interview where you said the reporter would pull a nugget from it. And that kind of happens. And maybe the nugget was used to paint the story in a certain way, not the way I would have painted the story, not a lie, just a difference in approach. And that's kind of the way things go sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we can switch gears a little bit now to the shutdown. What reports are being missed, and which ones of those do you think are critical or could have multiplier effects down the road?
Sure. Since October 1, there have been so far 2 special reports. Principal federal economic indicators are sort of a subset of all the reports, and they're more special. They have more backing. Monthly crop production was not published in October. Monthly cattle on feed was not published in October. We're recording this here on October 31. Later today, there should be a prices report published. It will not be published. Even if the government were to open now, there's no report to publish.
Right.
So there's 3. But in addition, there's other reports that are not these principal federal economic indicators, but they're important to someone. Weekly broilers, monthly egg production. There is monthly ethanol production and the usages of soybeans and corn to produce various oils and meal and things like that. Those have been absent. And I would say now, based on today's date, it's unlikely there would be a November crop production report that's scheduled for the 10th or the 12th maybe. There's not enough time to gather the data and publish a report, even if the government were to open now. It would be difficult or impossible. Similar, cattle on feed, end of the month prices again, those 3 monthly principal federal economic indicators. I worry some that in December there are some quarterly reports with significance. Quarterly hogs is a principal federal economic indicator. That fits into that whole category of things like the jobs report and the inflation report. They're special in some ways. Data collection for that quarterly hogs report would start in late November. Similar for acreage yield production and stocks. Also, winter wheat planting is happening now. It's kind of finishing up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
There are reports scheduled to be where data collection would be mostly in December, and those, I hope, are able to go forward, but something needs to change.
Right. One thing that thinking about, we're talking about what's being missed right now is when I worked at the Economic Research Service, the long-term baseline projections, analysts were working on those in December. They got finalized in January. In February, we released the first farm income outlook for that year. So, February 26th, you're talking about what's expected farm income, given everything we know about supply and demand at the beginning of the year, and a lot of anticipation for that one. But, I'm just thinking a lot of the stuff you're talking about probably goes into work that needs to start November, December to get all this together.
You're right. I think because of this shutdown, and there's been other shutdowns in the past, there's sort of
Absolutely.
holes in the data set. People are used to seeing a report every month on something, but sometimes there was no report because of lapse of funding like what's happening now. So that the economists and statisticians that are using the data NASS publishes will have holes in their data sets, and that means it's harder to do their jobs. In particular now, as we were at harvest, or will it pass peak harvest maybe, that's when a lot of the financial transactions are taking place for crops. I think the biggest month for sales is actually January. It's something to do with taxation.
Right.
October, November, December, January are big sales months for crops, and that's impacting the season average price, which has an impact on farm programs and other things.
Oh, are they so for Arkin PLC, you have the market year average price, and you have a monthly marketing percentage and
That's
a
right.
monthly price. So that's not being collected, or
No,
that they're going to skip
the
October.
October is missed.
Yeah.
So there'll be, hopefully things get fixed, and there'll be a November report, and there'll be 11 out of 12 months instead of 12 out of 12 months.
So it sounds, there's still a lot of uncertainty. If they go back to work Monday or in 2 or 3 weeks or a month, it could look pretty different, but there'll definitely be holes, is what it sounds like.
Yes, certainly holes from October. I don't think there's ever... it's impossible to go back and backfill an October report. The October crop production report should reflect conditions as of October 1. That ship has sailed. Similar for, let's say, cattle on feed. October 1, cattle on feed. Things like that. They're date-focused, and those dates have passed.
Are any NASS employees considered essential? Do you know?
Yes, a fairly small number. I don't know how many. My former boss is essential. He's able to do a little, but not a lot. There's, I'm sure, as part of the shutdown, employees were told, at least in the past, were told to go to the office and you get an hour of time or something like that. You need to put a proper message on your phone to go into it. When someone calls, the message says, office is closed and I'm gone because of the lapse of funding. Similar with email. You need to have an automatic response. So every time an email is sent to someone like me, there would be an automatic response that says, nobody's here. And that stuff has happened for several hundred employees, and I'm not sure how many are active. And there's not enough staff to do the things. And they're mostly at this higher levels where they're a few years removed from actually doing the journeyman work. They've moved up the ladder. They're at the supervisor level and the managerial level.
Right. I assume people that are working on data security would be considered essential.
I imagine so. I'm not familiar with exactly who's in or out of that list.
I don't even know the right word. I just hope that part
essential is the word, and it's unfortunate because some people say, well, all these other people aren't essential. Well, it's maybe not essential to have your trash picked up every single day, but if you don't pick up the trash, it becomes essential. And sorry, I didn't mean to say that government employees are picking up trash. They're doing a whole lot of vital things.
Absolutely. Based on your experience, how do you think the sort of, again, we don't know. Is it going to be next week? Is it going to be a couple weeks? But how is this affecting farmers, ranchers, businesses based on your experience? The data not being collected and reported.
I would say in terms of daily operations, relatively small impact. People are still harvesting crops and they're planting winter wheat and they're selling cattle or doing those things. But now let's plan next year. What is your crop? You're farming 1,000 acres in central Illinois. What is your crop breakdown next year? How much corn and how much soybeans is the basic question.
Absolutely.
That's harder to answer without having some data, and some farmers and ranchers are probably doing this work themselves. A lot of people are paying some sort of they're getting a monthly newsletter from a market analyst who's giving them advice on when to market their crop. Should they hold it for a while? Should they sell now? Are prices going to go up? What's the impact of what's happened in China just recently with the president?
Yeah.
Those things are important for how ag businesses, farmers, ranchers do their business. Some of the information is lacking, so it's harder to plan. Doesn't mean you can't plan, it means you have to plan with less information.
Right. And people are also making input purchase decisions now.
There you go.
Now, too. So, it's not just...
Part of my job was answering data requests from people, and one of the common requests I would get was about cash rent.
Oh, yes.
A lot of Illinois farmland is cash rented. Some is share rented. Those are the two basic processes. But in general, the farmers that are planting the crops and harvesting the crops, they don't own all that land. They're renting a bunch of it. Cash rent is interesting. And I would frequently once or twice a year, I get a call from someone who says they just inherited land from their parent who's passed. Or maybe mom or dad is no longer mentally competent. Now they're the person in charge of the finances. And they're looking at what mom or dad was getting for the land they rented. Yeah. They don't think it's fair. What's a fair price? And I couldn't answer for their piece of land, but I could typically give them a county average price. And that helped them know, was mom or dad getting a fair price or not? And there are also farmers and ranchers who developed contracts with their landlords based on those NASS things. So if their land was, let's say, better than the average in the county, the formula was we'll take the NASS county average cash rent and add 10% because it's better land.
Yep.
Those data sets may be in danger. I hope not. There's probably still time to get those because it's a season average thing, not a point-in-time thing.
Absolutely. Well, there's so much I think we'll have to do a second episode maybe and focus on just one particular survey from the beginning to the end. I think that could be really, really neat to hear. But I'd be
glad to help you out anytime.
Yeah, no, that would be pretty insightful to kind of get into how the process works. Were there any other topics that you wanted to discuss? I know one of the things you mentioned is chemical use statistics. The EPA uses these.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure people knew that.
Okay.
that the Environmental Protection Agency has the role of setting limits on how agricultural chemicals are used and also household chemicals. There's rules on the back of everything you pick up, every bug killer you can buy. Read the label, follow the directions, do that. And farmers and ranchers do that. They frequently hire people to do this commercially, but the rates are set by EPA, and they use databases from published results that NASS did on surveying farmers about their chemical use. It can be very important. When I was in Wisconsin, that's when I did the first one. They have some areas that are devoted, they're very sandy soils in parts of Wisconsin. It's devoted to vegetable production, usually processed vegetables. So canned green beans, frozen sweet corn, potatoes, things like that. And that soil is different. And so they wanted to restrict the levels of pesticides that could be used in those areas because they're trying to protect the environment, and good for them. Now let's have some data to use to see what are reasonable restrictions, what can be done, what's reasonable, what's not reasonable.
So it helps policymakers reach a more effective solution for whatever law they're trying to follow or rule that's being... That's
right. And when NASS publishes reports on the financial status of farms and ranches, then when legislation is being created, frequently there's some sort of a limit put on where if you are selling more than this amount, then the rules change for you. It's done in all kinds of legislation. Well, it would be nice to know the breakdown of farms. How many farms are going to be impacted by this legislation? Yep. And that's where NASS provides a number of databases that are very helpful to legislators at the state, county, and federal level.
There's two questions I always ask people. I'm not sure if I reminded you. They're both completely optional. But number one is, what would you like people to know about your job that may not be apparent or obvious, or the work that you've done? And the second one is, you get to change one policy. What is it?
Wow.
They're optional.
I wish you'd prepped me.
Sorry, that one is absolutely on me.
I think it would be nice if people knew the amount of care and attention in the data processing and analysis of the data before results are published. If you gather data from many, many people, no matter what methodologies you're using, there will be some mistakes in the data. That is just the way things are. As your data set gets bigger, there's more mistakes, key punch errors, misunderstandings. Good computer programs will find those problems. Smart people will fix those problems, because maybe it's legitimate. Maybe this is an organic farm and their corn yield is 75 bushels an acre.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's not a mistake. It's just unusual.
Right.
Another place, maybe it was actually 175 bushels per acre, and somebody just, stuff happens when you're keying data.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I certainly learned a lot, and hopefully people can better understand what data collection processes look like, why we have it, who it affects. So, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Smoke and Mirrors. If today made you think or see things a little differently, share it with someone who appreciates cutting through the noise. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for spending part of the day with us. Until next time, keep asking what matters.